What if I told you that right now, in this very moment, there is a saint in heaven whose entire purpose is to show up for the people everyone else has given up on? Not the easy cases. Not the clean stories. The ones that feel finished. The ones where you've already tried everything, prayed every prayer, knocked on every door, and watched them all close in your face. That is exactly where Saint Jude Thaddeus steps in. And today, on Living Hope, we are going to talk about why. Most people have heard the name. You've seen it in newspaper classifieds, in little handwritten thank you notes published in Catholic journals, in the worn medals carried in the pockets of people who have been through things they don't talk about at dinner. Saint Jude, Patron of Impossible Causes. But here's what most people don't know. That title wasn't invented by a marketing team. It wasn't assigned arbitrarily. It grew organically, over centuries, from the testimonies of real people who were standing at the edge of everything they had, with nothing left to offer but desperation, and who found that desperation was exactly enough. To understand why Saint Jude holds this particular place in the spiritual landscape of Christianity, you have to go back to who he actually was. Jude Thaddeus was one of the original 12 apostles. He walked with Jesus. He heard the Sermon on the Mount with his own ears. He sat at the Last Supper. He was there. And yet, for most of Christian history, he was the overlooked one. The forgotten apostle. Part of the reason is almost painfully ironic. His name, Jude. So close to Judas, the name of the betrayer, that for centuries, the faithful avoided praying to him. They were afraid of the confusion. Afraid of what it might look like to invoke a name that sounded so much like the man who had sold the Son of God for 30 pieces of silver. And so Jude Thaddeus waited. Prayers piled up at other altars. Other saints were called upon first, second, third. Jude sat in a kind of holy obscurity, rarely invoked, rarely celebrated. And something remarkable happened as a result. Because he received so few prayers, when someone finally did turn to him, out of pure desperation, when every other option had been exhausted, when pride had been stripped away and all that remained was raw, unfiltered need, those prayers were answered with a frequency and a power that could not be ignored. Word spread quietly at first, then louder, then across continents. This is the saint you call when there's nothing left. This is the saint who meets you at rock bottom and doesn't flinch. There's a spiritual logic to this that goes deeper than coincidence or legend. In Catholic theology, the intercession of saints is understood as a real, living connection between the church on earth and the church in heaven. The saints are not distant historical figures frozen in stained glass. They are alive, active, engaged with the ongoing story of humanity. And among them, Jude occupies a unique position. His centuries of relative obscurity created a kind of spiritual reserve, a depth of availability and focus that manifests as extraordinary power in the most desperate circumstances. He is not stretched thin by easy requests. He is specialized. He is the one who handles what others can't. Now, let's be careful here, because this is important. Turning to Saint Jude is not about magic. It is not about finding a shortcut around the hard work of faith or bypassing the sovereignty of God. What it is about is relationship. It is about the Christian understanding that we were never meant to face our struggles alone, that God in His wisdom and mercy has populated heaven with advocates, intercessors, people who once walked this earth and knew what it felt like to be afraid, to be desperate, to be in over their heads, and who now stand before the throne of grace on our behalf. Saint Jude is one of those advocates. And his specialty, forged through centuries of being the last resort, is meeting people precisely where hope runs out. Think about what it actually means to be at the end of your rope. Think about the specific quality of that desperation. It's not the mild anxiety of a difficult week. It's the 3 a.m. feeling when a diagnosis has just landed that you didn't see coming. It's the moment when a relationship you thought was solid reveals a crack so deep you don't know if anything can bridge it. It's the financial situation that has spiraled past the point where a single solution could fix it. It's the health crisis that the doctors are shaking their heads at. These are the moments where human strength genuinely runs out, where the pride that usually keeps us from asking for help has been completely dismantled by circumstances, where we finally get honest enough to say, I cannot do this alone. And that honesty, that stripped down, nothing left to lose honesty, is exactly the posture from which the intercession of Saint Jude tends to move most powerfully. Not because God requires our desperation to act, but because desperation, real desperation, tends to produce the kind of faith that is free of performance, free of pretense, free of the self-reliance that quietly blocks the channels of grace. When you have nothing left to prove and nowhere else to turn, you pray differently. You pray from the gut. You pray like you mean it. And that kind of prayer, directed through the intercession of a saint who has been the refuge of the desperate for 500 years, carries a weight that cannot be easily dismissed. The testimonies are staggering in their consistency. Across cultures, across centuries, across wildly different circumstances, the pattern repeats. Someone is in an impossible situation. They turn to Saint Jude, often after having tried everything else. And something shifts. Sometimes it's dramatic, the kind of turnaround that leaves doctors speechless and families in tears. Sometimes it's quieter, a peace that descends in the middle of chaos, a clarity that cuts through confusion, a door that opens where there was nothing but wall. But the shift happens. And the person who experienced it knows, in that place where knowing lives deeper than logic, that something real occurred. That their cry was heard. That they were not alone. What is it about this particular apostle that creates that channel? Beyond the historical factors, beyond the theological framework, there is something in the character of Jude Thaddeus himself that speaks to the overlooked, the forgotten, the people who feel like they don't deserve a miracle. He was the overlooked apostle. He knows what it is to be unseen, to be passed by, to have your name confused with someone else's shame. And that shared experience of being on the margins, of being the one people didn't think to call first, creates a resonance between his story and the stories of the people who finally find their way to him. He gets it. Not as a metaphor. As a lived reality that he carries into his intercession. This is why so many people who have been through the worst seasons of their lives describe the experience of praying to Saint Jude not as a transaction, not as a religious obligation, but as a conversation with someone who actually understands. Someone who won't judge the desperation, who won't require you to have it together before he'll listen, who meets you exactly where you are with exactly the compassion the moment requires. That quality of his intercession, that unconditional availability to the broken and the desperate, is what has made him not just a historical figure but a living presence in the faith lives of millions of people across centuries and continents. If you are watching this right now and there is something heavy on your shoulders, something that has been wearing you down, something that feels like it has moved past the point of rescue, I want you to hear this clearly. You have not been forgotten. The same God who knew Jude Thaddeus would spend centuries in obscurity and then emerge as the patron of impossible cases knows your name, knows your situation, and has not run out of options. The story isn't over. The door that looks closed may simply be the one that opens from the other side. And the invitation today is simple. It's not complicated. You don't need a theology degree or a perfect prayer life or a clean record. You need what Saint Jude has always responded to: a sincere heart and the willingness to ask. Bring your impossible thing to him. Lay it down. Speak it plainly, the way you'd tell a trusted friend what's really going on. And then watch, with whatever faith you can muster, even if it's small, even if it's shaking, for what begins to move. Here at Living Hope, this is what we do. We come alongside people in exactly these moments, the ones where faith feels fragile and circumstances feel overwhelming, and we remind you of what is true. That hope is not a feeling. Hope is a person. And that person has appointed intercessors, advocates, and saints to walk with you through every season, including the ones that feel impossible. If this video met you where you are today, if something in these words resonated with something you've been carrying, we want to stay in your corner. Subscribe to Living Hope and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single message. Because every week, we bring you content designed to strengthen your faith, anchor your soul, and remind you that no matter how dark the season, the light of hope is never extinguished. We'll see you in the next one.